Hi there, Jonathan here. The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website where you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. That's at www.jonathanfoust.com. Thank you and enjoy. So I see right off the bat I have what looks like a typo in my talk, which was that tonight I wanted to explore the theme of, this is what I wrote, desire, addition, and liberation. I guess it's the same thing as addiction and liberation, because it's the wanting, that wanting more. So I realized as this talk is about desire and how desire plays into how we get caught and how we can free ourselves, that I had a desire for you to like this talk. I realized that's not exactly it. I really had a desire for you to like me. And I realized, of course, well, that impedes the creative process. So I worked on that, and now I could care less if you like the talk. So I feel much freer. So desire, of course, is not bad. We tend to put it in that category of getting caught in desire can be a challenge, but desire itself is not necessarily bad. Desire can actually help you to really open up to what's most important in your life. And I do have a desire around this talk, and that is that it's helpful for you. And I put that in the category of wholesome desire. Not attached, I just hope it's helpful. So there are 4 things I'd like to touch on in this talk, and as usual, we'll have some short inquiries and reflections through it. The first is to review a little bit of what I talked about last time, 2 weeks ago, about desire and how it plays into the 4 essential principles of Buddhist philosophy or Buddhist psychology, and to talk about how fear impacts your desires, and then how love impacts your desires, and then a little bit about what it means to live without desire. What does that mean? How can we even begin to play with that a little bit? Because there's some freedom in there. So I was reflecting on this model of these 4 essential principles, and I had a great example. The new year of living mindfully will be starting in about 3 weeks, and there were 55 people who applied for 35 slots. The good news is that a lot of people want to do the program, and the bad news is that I feel terrible about saying no to 20 people who really want to do the program. I hate being a bearer of bad news. And so I sat with that, just that unpleasant feeling of having to be the bearer of bad tidings. But as I sat with it, I realized, well, maybe there's a way I can support people who can't do the program this year. And when I look closer at the applications, it might be beneficial for some people to maybe wait another year, but it's an opportunity to actually kind of deepen a connection and support them in their practice, which of course is the most important thing. And so I'm finding a way to sort of stay in touch and support people outside the program. And that little process I went through was really kind of a little journey through those 4 essential truths that inform Buddhist psychology. The first is stress and suffering happens. It's a fact of life. Despite the program being successful and feeling fully enrolled, I felt stressed. I felt some tension around it. So that's the first point, that stress and suffering happen. The second is that there's a cause. There's always a cause for stress and suffering. And it has to do with identification. It has to do with holding on. And I realized I was holding on to not wanting to be the bad guy. I kind of calcified around that resistance to having to be in that role. The third element refers to the cessation of suffering. That whatever you're holding on to, it's possible to let go. And then when I look closer at like what I was attached to, this sense of me being liked and being the good guy, which is something I enjoy. Well, what it needed was a little closer investigation. And I was able to see that I could let that go. And the fourth point is that there's a path that leads to the cessation of stress and suffering. And the path is basically staying on the path. It's the practices, it's the guidelines, the riverbanks that support you. So the model is so simple, and yet can you get that sense of how anywhere you've got a complaint in your life, anywhere you're tight, if you look closely, you will find the cause. You'll find the source of that. It's very helpful. It takes some rigor. But when you identify it, you can then really begin to investigate it and ask yourself if you can begin to kind of let that go. So a little 2-minute reflection, if you will. You can close your eyes. We'll do a little reflection on these four elemental components. You might take a moment and just think about something in your life right now that's troubling you. Something that is a source of stress, or maybe a complaint that you have. Something not going your way. And just take a few moments to kind of land on one thing. You might take a moment to look a little closer at it, to kind of feel what it feels like, your visual, to see the visual component. And you might reflect on this first element, that stress happens. And can you identify what it feels like to be in this stressful situation? Can you locate what that feels like inside? The next question, what are you holding on to? Is there a sense of what it is that you're holding on to tightly? And the next question, could you let it go? If you could let it go, would you? And what would it feel like if you could let that go? And the next question, is there a sense of what you need to let this go? What would support you in feeling more alive in this particular situation? And just notice if anything might have shifted in some way. Then as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And you can let your eyes open if you like, or you can remain with them closed if you prefer. So we live inside this framework. There's stress. There's recognizing the source of the stress. There's asking if we can let go of that. and then asking what it is that's going to support us and continuing to let go of that. And it's all about self-identification. It all comes down to the story you tell yourself and about sensing what it means to let that story go. The more we're holding on to our sense of a tightly bound sense of self, the more we tend to struggle. As my friend Anam Tubden says, no self, no problem. But we live in this tightly bound sense of self-protection. So it's spring, first day of spring. Have you noticed all the birds coming in, the new bird sounds? It's one of my greatest joys being on the river is they're just all these new birds coming. And I remember a couple of years ago, Tara and I were going for a walk, and the birds were really calling. It was an early spring, a number of years ago. And Tara said, "What do you think they're saying?" And I said, "I'll tell you exactly what they're saying." I said, "You know that one? You hear that one over there?" She goes, "Yeah." I said, "That one's saying, 'Come over here and I'll rip your throat out.' And that one over there, it's saying, 'Hey, big boy, come on over here.' And the one over, it's saying, 'Look at me, look at me, look at me.'" Pretty much like us. We're pretty much saying the same thing. We are in a constant state of defending who we are, our sense of identity, our story, and doing everything we can to protect it. And the truth is that the freedom lies in letting go of that sense of story. I mean, the hardcore teaching from the Buddha was, he said, nothing whatsoever is to be clung to as I or mine. And when you think about that, those moments when there's no I or mine are the magic moments in your life. They're the moments of deep intimacy. They're the moments of deep creativity. They're the moments of feeling the mystery. So it's very much about exploring how we can loosen up this sense of self. When the sense of self recedes, there's more space, there's more freedom, there's more happiness, there's more joy. And when there's a self-protected sense of self, we feel more tight, we feel more bound. And so when you live from fear, that self-protective mechanism kicks in all kinds of different desires. And the desires are usually around self-protection, avoiding domination, and dominating others, which is where we tend to spend some time. One of the things it's interesting in my life is that I work with a lot of business leaders and CEOs and a lot of successful people. And there was someone who I was having a kind of a deep conversation with who, by all outward appearances, was very successful. He'd built up this organization, he'd made a lot of money, but he was there to talk to me because there was a pervasive sense of sadness that he couldn't shake. You know, he'd reached that point in his life where he thought, once I'm making this much money, then I'll be happy. Well, he was making that much money and he wasn't happy. And we explored that sense of sadness, that embodied sense of sadness that he felt like he was carrying around. And he realized that he was completely beset by regrets. He was aware of everything that he'd missed in his life. He had shortchanged his family, he had shortchanged his friends in order to focus on work to be successful. He put off children because he wasn't ready, and then it was kind of too late. And he was lacking a sense of connectedness and a sense of intimacy in his life. And we took some time not to rush into this and try and fix it, because that was his style. but to really just pause and really honor the sadness and the regrets that he felt in his life. He realized for him that his desire for worldly success pretty much ran his life, and he missed out on his life. And I think for myself, the times when I feel the most sadness are when I realize that there were these chunks of my life I wasn't there for, because I was on my way towards somewhere else as fast as I could get there. So it's important to really pause and kind of acknowledge how that mechanism of fear sets in desires that sometimes work against us. So another 2-minute reflection, if you like. You can close your eyes and you might deepen your breath. There is someone who has worked with the dying for their whole career. And in their conversations, they said the number one regret of the dying is, I wasn't true to myself. You might just take a moment as you feel the breath and just to reflect, what did you miss out on in this life? Are there regrets that you carry? What were you wanting? What were you hoping for that maybe you didn't have the time to do? There's an interesting reflection as part of this, and that is, if you were absolutely guaranteed success in anything you chose to do, what would you do? And again, when you're ready, you can deepen the breath. And you can let your eyes open. Fear can be a helpful mechanism. It helps us to stay alive on this planet. But it can also hold us back. And of course, that mechanism of fear is always there. And I've noticed with the year of living mindfully, just referencing that this is the 9th year I'm offering it. Every year, I have this fear that not enough people will be interested, which is followed by a fear of, I have too many people. I hate to, it's like, oh God, I swore I wouldn't do it this year. There it was. But fear puts in motion this self-preservation mode. We're afraid of making the wrong decision. We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of losing. We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of losing face with our peers. We're afraid of pain. That fear lives on the inside, and it holds us back from feeling fully alive. And when we live in this self-preservation mode, life gets really, really small. I have a really humiliating story to tell on this one. My parents were both depression kids. My father was, when he was a kid, he would ride around town with his bicycle selling bread that his mother would make, and that's how they got through. So we were really frugal as a family. And there was always that sense that there wasn't enough. And I was very, we had a wonderful life, all that good stuff. But then I lived in an ashram and I had a poverty vow for many, many years. So I was making $28 a month. And then we got a raise to $35 a month, which was mind-blowing. That's for 13 years. And so when I left and I came down here to D.C., I was driving an old van, and it finally died. And Tara said, well, why don't you buy a small little car? And, I have my station wagon. Maybe you could buy a convertible, And it just didn't sit right. And I realized, I went back to her, I said, I'm sorry, I am not comfortable buying a car I can't sleep in. And it was true. It was true. I've come along since then. But again, that self-protective, self-preservational fear is part of what informs us. Or at least it informs me. So how do we counteract fear? Well, the opposite of fear and contraction is love and intimacy and connection and wholesome. Fear was a really big part of my upbringing, that kind of self-preservational fear. And I had one very poignant moment, one of those searing moments from my childhood. I grew up on a farm. My father was a college professor, and lots of my aunt and uncle were professors. And I think it must have been 6 or 7 years old. And there must have been some conversation around PhD theses and stuff like that. And I remember sitting on the smokehouse roof, 6 or 7 years old, with this horrible gnawing feeling in my guts of what am I going to write my dissertation on? They're all going to be taken by the time I get there. And there was this real angst of what am I going to do? How am I going to get by in this life? And the sense that the only way to get by is to take something away from someone else. And then I had this little 6-year-old insight, which was, what if I just try to help people? Would it be possible to just help people in this life? And that created a shift for me. And I began to look for ways that I could help. And there was a sense if I help people, then I'll be okay. And that kind of kicked off a whole orientation to life. And since then, I've had the opportunity to kind of practice deeply and serve in a number of different ways. And there's something very powerful for me in really embracing service as a path to want to be of help. And that has set up a whole different set of desires in my life. And it's a very different equation. So another short reflection, if you will. You can close your eyes. When you reflect on the breath once again, just to feel the breath and to relax on the out-breath. And when you reflect on whatever it means to cultivate wholesome desire, what do you want in this life? What do you want for yourself? What do you want for your loved ones? How can you serve in your own way? How can you touch those around you in a way that is wholesome? And again, you can deepen the breath. And you can let your eyes open. There's this maxim from yoga philosophy that says, where the attention goes, the energy flows. Whatever you focus on, it gets bigger. The story I often tell is how I rode motorcycles for most of my life until I moved down here and realized I wouldn't be here very long. And I read lots of books on how not to die on a motorcycle. And so when you go into a tight curve, either in a car or a motorcycle, and you're going fast, you're trained to keep your attention on the exit of the curve. If you focus on the exit of the curve, the energy is most probably going to follow where your eyes are focused. So in that same way, when we fixate on fear, what we see is fear everywhere. And when we focus on wholesome desire, we begin to notice a different set of variables out there. So the question becomes, well, what is it that you want that's wholesome? So there are healthy desires. The desire to be awake. The desire to be more compassionate in your life. The desire to provide for your family and for your friends. The desire to make a difference in the world. The desire to be a contribution. The desire to leave the world a better place than when you got here. Those are wholesome desires that can inform your life and call you forward in compelling ways. And it's still a desire. And that brings up another question, which is, well then, what does it mean to be without all desire? You know, there's the desire informed by fear, there's the desire informed by wholesome, and then there's, well, who are you without desire? So a good friend of mine, one of my best friends on the planet, we've been practicing for years together, and we teach together, and he said that he's really feels in his own practice that enlightenment, if you will, is simply the absence of desire. When you're without desire, there's a quality of presence, which we'll explore a little more. But it's a little bit of a challenging concept of who you are without desire. You know, does it mean you just say yes to brutality? Reminded me of that scene in Animal House when they're doing the hazing in one of the fraternities where the guys are in their underwear and they're smacked with a paddle and they say, "Please, sir, may I have another?" And they do that over and over again. I hope that's not what non-desire looks like. But the question becomes, what would happen if you didn't try to manipulate your life? What would happen if you just let it happen? It's a fascinating inquiry. It always messes me up when I think about marketing. Because I remember one of the things in the ashram, one of the things the guru said, he said, when the tree is flowering, the bees will come. And there is something very powerful about when you rest in presence, what would happen? What would that attract? So another reflection, if you will. So to bring your attention again to the breath. The mind and your whole biological organism is designed to move away from pain and toward pleasure. There's a very powerful survival mechanism that keeps you alive by avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. And yet, in the development of the brain, there is this capacity to deeply rest. And you might just sense in these minutes, who are you in the absence of desire? what would it mean in this moment if there was nothing to add and nothing to take away? But this moment in itself was absolutely complete. And gently deepening the breath. And if you like, you can open the eyes. One of the powerful benefits of mindfulness meditation, or we could call it non-judging awareness meditation, is that it calms the whole system, and it calms the mind. And just in stepping back, even in those moments of just reflecting on who you are in the absence of desire, can just bring a little taste, a little glimpse of what it means to feel complete, needing nothing, wanting nothing. In this world where we are so bombarded with stimulation, it's very easy to get used to the level of stimulation. There's a new phrase out there called hedonic adaptation, which means you get used to your stuff. So you get your new phone and it's amazing, and then it's not. So it's like, well, how do you like your new computer? I've already hedonically adapted. So there's an interesting study. Well, there are two groups. One group was told, for the next week, eat as much chocolate as you want. The other group was told, for the next week, refrain from eating chocolate. So then they brought them back together and had them eat some chocolate. No surprise, but those who hadn't eaten chocolate for a week reported incredible happiness when they ate that chocolate. And for those who'd been eating as much as they wanted, it didn't register as anything special. It's a very interesting thing to explore, just stepping back, and it's an interesting practice sometimes, just to kind of to step back from habitual activity, and then when you re-enter it, to let it inform you. But in that same way, when you practice meditation, whether it be a formal sit or even just taking a few minutes just to withdraw from the activity of your life, again, it not only settles the mind, the muddy water of the mind can settle for a few moments, but when you re-engage much more alive. And what happens over the course of time, the more you meditate, the more you become aware of your desires. And again, non-judging awareness is the byproduct of the practice. So you begin to see the desires that are informed by fear, and you begin to see the desires that are informed by those wholesome qualities. And from that place of non-judging awareness, you begin to have some options, when before it was just pure reactivity. And finally, just in these final moments, there's an interesting distinction between the word desire and the word aspiration. Aspiration has kind of an openness to possibility. But as soon as it's tied into expectation, then it gets caught again. It's kind of a craving. So when you reflect on your wholesome desires, it's very important to give it time. One of my teachers, Gil Fronsdal, was a wonderful teacher. he says that craving comes out of restlessness. That's when you're bored and you just want something to happen. That sets up the craving, the kind of the unwholesome desire. He said the wholesome desire and the aspiration, it tends to come from relaxation and stillness. And I've noticed that for myself, that like my deepest aspirations, my deepest wholesome desires tend to come out of those moments when I'm the most quiet. So it's an interesting thing to explore in your own practice. That when you can quiet the mind to really ask yourself, what are my deepest desires? What are my deepest aspirations? And to listen to that voice that arises. So let's close with a short yet brief meditation. Again, you might feel the breath. Just reflecting on how desires can arise from fear and self-protection. But desires can also arise from love and possibility. And you might just sense in these final moments your own desire or aspiration to be kind, to be free, to contribute to others. And deepening your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open. So I hope you like this talk. I don't need you to like this talk, but I do hope you found it helpful. A few announcements before we go. First, I just want to say awesome yoga. It seemed like a really wonderful group in there today. It's at 6:30. Also, I just want to let you know you can, of course, sign up for the weekly newsletter in the back. Your support for the class and myself is deeply appreciated. But also, we're adding something, and that is if you'd like to join an an after-class discussion group, just as a way to kind of connect with others. It's a really, really cool thing. And Ray, do you mind just coming up and saying a few words about what it is and what it's like and anything you want to say about it?
So I've been coming here for about a year and a half, and I always thought that there was something missing after the talk, and it was a discussion group. I don't know if many of you go to Tara's talks, but there's a discussion group after that. And Tara and myself approached Jonathan to lead a discussion group. And we'll meet at about 8:50 and end around 9:30. We'll meet over here. And there's basically two parts to the discussion group. The beginning part is we go around the circle, and basically it gives you a chance to talk about what resonated within you from today's talk. And at the end, we'll actually do more of a discussion group. But the key is really to be able to be heard what resonated with you. So if you want to join us, we'll be up here in the front after the talk.
Thank you, Ray. It's just a wonderful way to kind of connect, and another way to take a little time afterward as well is to have some tea. And as one Zen master said, the spiritual path is long and arduous, so you might need a cookie. So that's out there as well. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you for coming.